We're going to spend the rest of the show talking about all of the many things happening in the community related to medical marijuana, recreational marijuana, legislation, all new ballot proposals. I guess I'll start with Joshua because I know you've been busy putting together the kickoff, you and Jeff, for the ballot proposal that is called MILegalize.
MILegalize,
MILegalize,
yes.
Michigan Legalize, and why do we need yet another ballot proposal here in Michigan? What will this one do, and how will they find a way to subvert it?
Hopefully it'll lose positive
Big time.
Tell us, Joshua, what's the plan with the proposal? What does it say, and what will it do if it passes?
Yeah, I think the highlights of the proposal is that we decriminalize all criminal offenses in terms of marijuana, except for selling to someone under 18 and driving while under the influence. Anything else would be a civil infraction, so that's one of the big steps. We also leave the control in terms of a lot of the licensing in the local government as opposed to state government. And so I think those are two of the big highlights for me, at least.
It would take it away from LARA, the licensing and regulation.
We keep the Medical Marijuana Act completely intact. We just provide additional protections to those that are medical patients as well as to anyone over the age of 21.
Okay, so this would strengthen, I think, the original intent of the medical marijuana law by allowing things like medibles, apparently, and oils and different kinds of versions of medical marijuana that are tied up in litigation still. At the same time, it would also decriminalize recreational marijuana, basically except for kids and except for driving.
Adult use marijuana is the preferred nomenclature we use rather than recreational.
Thank you. Looking for the right term. Yes. Adult use marijuana. That's a good term because it reminds people that you're not eager to get it into the hands of kids.
The reason we really need
They
this,
actually are the ones who can get it now and could give it to us, but that's a different...
That's very true. But Bonnie, you asked why do we need this? It's because the legislature can't effectively do this on their own. They can't even manage medical marijuana appropriately. 7 or 8 years after the Medical Marijuana Act is passed, dispensaries are in a gray zone. The safest forms of medical marijuana don't exist legally, according to the Court of Appeals, and so we can't.
And they
wait for
drag
the
their feet on
legislature.
making any of the changes.
Yeah, we can't wait for the legislature. So we're going to legalize marijuana for adults over the age of 21, preserve, protect, and improve safe access to medical marijuana for medical marijuana patients, and we're going to provide for the farming of industrial hemp. So those are the three main tiers to our program.
So there's an industrial hemp component.
Yes, and then we take the money that we raise from this program, 40% goes into roads, or the Department of Transportation, 40% goes to public schools, public education, school aid fund.
Taxation, you mean?
Taxation,
A taxation element?
and then 20% goes back to local governments that license facilities. So we leave the Medical Act in place, as Josh said, so LARA will continue to deal with the medical marijuana program, but we put all licensing for marijuana establishments, as we call them, in the hands of local governments, and that's an incentive because the local governments that create these job creation facilities in their communities will receive 20% of the money back as an incentive, and they can use that for whatever they want, whether that's police, parks, roads, schools, pensions. Their hands aren't tied what that fund is used
Now,
for.
Rick is the editor of Compassion Chronicles, and there is going to be another competing ballot proposal, isn't there? So there's another group involved with producing another proposal. Can you give us a little background on what that proposal would do?
Well, I certainly can. There are actually 2 programs right now that have approved petition signature gathering in Michigan. Ours, which is the Michigan Comprehensive Cannabis Law Reform Initiative Committee, and then also the MCC, the Michigan Cannabis Coalition, I think they call themselves. A third group, the MRC, the Michigan Resource Council, has not yet revealed their language, nor have they sought approval of their petition by the state. So currently there are 2 sets of petitions out there being circulated. But it's
there might be a third?
Yeah, there might be a third. But it's
I didn't
easy.
know that.
It's easy to distinguish between the 3 because there is a big government proposal, there is a big money proposal, and there is a big people proposal. Guess which one we are? The MCC is what we call a big government proposal. They would like to have almost all of the decisions regarding cannabis and its distribution in Michigan made by the state government. The very people that we just complained were dragging their feet and couldn't get anything done. Yeah. They'd like to create a special control commission similar to the Liquor Control Commission, which a lot of people don't think has done a very good job either. The MRC, which is the big money group, has been rumored to want to have 10 large grow facilities throughout the state, similar to a proposal from Responsible Ohio in that state, creating like an oligopoly in the state regarding the production of marijuana for adult use and distribution. The MILegalize program as much more grassroots oriented. If you look at the 13 members of our board of directors, we have leaders from state organizations all across Michigan, leaders from Michigan Normal, from Michigan ASA, from Sons and Daughters United, from all types of charitable organizations have come together to be on the board of directors of our program.
And a quick question, when will you start passing the petitions for signature?
We began that on June 25th. We had a kickoff on June 25th right on the steps of the Capitol building. So we've been collecting for several weeks now. Not only have we collected signatures, we've had some pretty impressive fundraisers, including one in Ann Arbor where we received a promise of matching funds. For the next 30 days, actually I think it's about 20 days now, we'll be able to match any funds volunteered to the MILegalize program up to $100,000.
Ooh.
So we are actively seeking donors that would like to see their monies doubled. So this is a very crucial time for MILegalize.
Do you have a Kickstarter for that? Will they let you do one?
You can donate online at our website at milegalize.com/donate. It's not a Kickstarter. You know, we have to keep certain information for campaign finance reporting reasons, of course. But everyone can donate online, or you can find information where to send a check to. We really need these funds in the next few days. Anyone who believes in the marijuana legalization in Michigan, now is the moment to step up to the plate.
Well, we've seen this be so successful in Colorado, where crime rates have gone down. The problems with that they had with the illegal, making marijuana illegal have virtually evaporated as a result. There may be some concern about people on highways, but those are manageable problems, clearly. At the same time, it's created a whole new class of people who are getting wealthy from that new industry that's emerging, people that hadn't been in it before. It seems Michigan is lagging now, where they were ahead of other states. Now we're sort of lagging behind. My question is, what is the legislature doing? Because I'm seeing they could still sort of cause problems with various. They certainly did with the medical marijuana law. How are you bulletproofing your proposal so that it is less likely to be tampered with?
Well, in one sense, there's no way that you can bulletproof it. Because the procedure on this involves collecting signatures for petitions, once we're successful with that, the legislature has a period of time in which they can adopt the law, amend it and adopt it, or take no action before it comes to the ballot itself. So there's an opportunity for the legislature to get our proposal in our language, and then still make some alterations that we may or may not agree with, and then make it become law. So to a certain degree, you have to accept when you go into this battle that you just can't control everything.
Well, there's a couple other things we did as well. We put the licensing in the hands of the locals, because there was fear that at the state level, if there was not the enforcement and enactment that we'd want to see happen here, because there was a top-down system. The local distribution model would be much better. But we've also built into things into the law, like the legislature can lower the tax rate. We set a 10% tax rate on adult use marijuana sales, but they can't raise that. So we've tried to do things to tie their hands, and by putting much control in the hands of local governments, we prevent the state legislature from in some ways monkeying with this law. But as Rick said, there's nothing we can do to totally prevent that.
Now, there have been attempts with other kinds of ballot proposals to make them constitutional amendments, which may make them less likely to may make them more bulletproof. Did you look at that strategy, or is that simply not appropriate?
We did look at that, and just in general, the polling doesn't, the people in Michigan don't really support constitutional amendments.
They don't.
Something like that in the Constitution the first time around.
Joshua, you have dealt with many clients who have run afoul of, now there's an attempt to try to get a new law passed concerning the nanograms they might find in your bloodstream of marijuana when you're driving. What kind of standard would this law create for the idea? You're saying that you would not approve of drug driving with the drug, but what would it set a test that should be used? Because one of the challenges right now is I don't think there are very many good tests that show
Yeah, with
impairment.
the MILegalize, what we do is we eliminate any sort of nanogram limit.
Okay.
We prevent that from happening, and we basically use the current jury the language from the current jury instruction or the current statute for operating while intoxicated. It basically, you have to show somebody's under the influence of marijuana in order to prosecute someone.
We're blessed to have 5 attorneys on the board of directors, so they certainly influence the language to help provide protections for individual citizens.
Are you getting any political support? Are there various individual legislators? Because right now it seems that the legislator is just sort of bogged down. And maybe, Rick, you could give us some idea. There are a number of bills still pending. Many people thought that we would see, for example, cannabis oil available for kids, that kind of thing, pediatric cannabis. That never happened. There have been a lot of disappointments along the road for parents who are really concerned that they're vulnerable to arrest and prosecution or having their children taken away, and yet they need that medication for their children. Where are we with the laws now?
Well, unfortunately, we're at the same place we were in 2013 when those things first became part of the Court of Appeals decision in the Carruthers Act. Because there's been pending legislation for several years now that hasn't gone anywhere, patients are still just as vulnerable as they were back then. You mentioned right off the bat, though, asking about support and endorsements. Representative Jeff Irwin has been a staunch supporter not only of legislation, but specifically of the MILegalize. He was one of our keynote speakers at that fundraiser in Ann Arbor that I mentioned previously. And I understand that Representative Irwin, I think, is even carrying some of our petitions around to have some of his fellows. Now, that's a rumor. I can't confirm that, Representative Irwin, but that's what I hear. Unfortunately, the rest of the legislation does seem to be stalled. Now, there's good news on the horizon, though. Representative Irwin released a draft 5 of the Provisioning Centers Act not that long ago, although it wasn't really a great version. And we are looking at having another hearing in the House Judiciary Committee during one day in July when the legislature is going to come back and meet during their summer vacation. So it's possible we'll have some dialogue on this within a few weeks.
Well, Bonnie, you may have also heard we were endorsed by the Michigan Green Party.
Yes.
Which is really cool.
Yeah.
So we're working on everybody else too. We hope to have all the major parties end up endorsing
I ran
us.
for Congress on that ticket, and I must admit, Michigan Green has always been famous in the state. Yes.
I want to get back to the petitions that are being circulated. Do you pay for the collection of signatures? Or
Yes,
is
we
it
do.
all- okay.
We have a lot of
Which is
volunteers.
typical. I
Yeah,
mean,
we have a
almost
lot of
every-
volunteers
You
out
don't
in the
succeed
field.
if you don't.
You don't, that's what I was
But
wondering.
if someone's interested in passing a petition and doing it as a full-time job, they need to contact the campaign, get signed up. We don't, not just willy-nilly paying people. You got to be one of our regular petitioners. Otherwise, we have an army of volunteers out there who are out there every day working really hard, and we appreciate them.
Remind people when the deadline is for submitting the petitions.
Well, we're looking at end of December. We hope to be done before Thanksgiving, so it's 6 months from June 25th, and we're on a rush to get done early and get this into the legislature to get that period rolling and get the people in Michigan fired up for November 2016.
Right now, there's going to be 2 petitions passed. How could I tell the difference? Because that's often obscure when people...
The language on the ballot
Yeah.
gets confusing
Well,
sometimes.
one thing you can do is you can look at the petition, our petition versus the Michigan Cannabis Coalition. Ours has a fold, and we say if you want to go for the gold, sign the one with a fold, because we have the gold standard of marijuana reform, our language. The Michigan Cannabis Coalition petition is 2 pages, so that's the easy way right now, you can tell. But you can look in the lower left-hand corner on each petition and see who it's from. People should look and see that it says Michigan Comprehensive Cannabis Law Reform Initiative. They know that's ours.
And when Jeff's referring to a fold, he means there's an extra flap on the sheet of paper. They're all standard size papers, but instead of just being a single sheet, ours has an additional flap over by where you initially sign where your city's at. So you can see just from looking at it that it's got that extra bulk there. That'll tell you you're signing the right one.
One of the things I learned from attending some of the hearings is that there really is a move now that this is becoming a big money possibility. You are seeing big money and big government both move in.
Yes, ma'am.
And some of the arguments made sounded so reasonable, that you really want quality control. You want to be able to be assured, as you would if you were taking an aspirin, that it was produced and it was the optimal prescription for an aspirin for you. So you would want to make sure that you had a pharmaceutical company involved. One of the models I'm seeing in some of the legislation would be literally using that Michigan liquor control model, and there are problems with that based on what I've been hearing and what we saw at that hearing. So many people really have almost individually tailored medications.
Right.
And so it really doesn't allow the flexibility. I think what we're learning about medicine more and more is that you have to target individual people. A 10-year-old isn't going to need the same thing as a 6-year-old. And
Remember a compounding center where
Yes.
pharmacists used to actually listen to what your ailments were and then assemble the different things he thought would help you and then create a little powder or a pill form that would do that for you? Compounding is similar to what we do in the cannabis industry, in the medical cannabis industry. And when you industrialize that process, you lose that feedback loop. The individual consumers can't tell Budweiser what they like or what they don't like about that beer, and therefore get a new version created for them. The second problem with that, though, is the warehousing concept. You can warehouse something like a Budweiser, but you can't warehouse cannabis, because cannabis has certain needs, and as a product, it needs to be circulated, it needs to have moisture removed from it. So there's a significant shelf life issue involved here too. And you can't produce medicine that's bad for people, even if it's just for adult use and it's not medicine anymore. So
Right.
those two programs, one may be successful for an alcohol industry, but it's completely inappropriate for what we do in this industry.
You know, Bonnie, to add to that too, we've learned that we've learned lessons from alcohol prohibition. You
Right.
can draw parallels, but we don't copy it exactly. We don't need a distribution center level. We don't need rich investors to come in and buy that top level piece of the economy right off the bat. It's ironic that our proposal is the more free market, small business, mom and pop shop program compared to two proposals coming out of the Oakland County Republican Party. It's almost hysterical that they would create a government control board with paid members to make all the decisions for everyone, when instead we say, no, we leave it up to the market and entrepreneurs and these farmers and the customers and their clients to decide what's best. So it's a very interesting parallel in the times we live in.
Right.
That's the dynamic.
I have two people that I know who are taking the medication Harvoni, which is $1,100 a pill for 90 days, one pill a day. You can do the math fairly quickly. Part of the challenge with the, part of the challenge with the pharmaceutical model is that you do tend to see enormous price rises. And one of the things I think that has been sort of a nice aspect of the almost mom and pop arrangement in Michigan with the caregivers having a close relationship with people is that, I mean, a lot of them actually end up giving medication to kids for free, doing all kinds of things. They're very community oriented and they don't follow a corporate model. How will we be able to tell in the ballot proposals? What is the other proposal all about? What would it do?
Well, the other proposal that's currently collecting signatures is from the MCC, and that's the one that is the big government proposal we
The big
discussed.
government, okay.
So if you're reading the back of the language itself, you'll see words like a Marijuana Control Commission, which is a government entity that they'd like to create. I know these people normally advocate for small government, but for whatever reason in this instance they'd like to expand. That's a dead giveaway that you're looking at the big government proposal right there. The Marijuana Control Commission, any kind of language that espouses that.
And so no growers would be able to sell directly to a dispensary or to an individual. They would have to go work through this sort of warehousing middleman arrangement?
Well, there's two. That would be more the MRC.
Oh, that's the
proposal.
MRC.
The MCC proposal would allow individuals to grow up to 2 plants, maybe, if their local government allowed them. If you contrast that with our proposal, we allow an adult to grow up to 12 plants before you have to get a commercial license.
Okay.
So that's one of the other issues where they're calling this marijuana legalization. Well, if you can't grow, it's really not legalization. We really want every city, you go from one city to the next and they tell you can grow up to 2 plants or not. So that's another one of these sort of big government
Right.
aspects of the MCC that we just completely couldn't be on board with. We tried to work with both these other groups. We said we have a common cause. And we don't want to bash these other groups and be too negative, but there is a difference between these proposals, and it's very important. We've modeled our proposal to have the best economic benefit for the people of the state of Michigan. We believe, based off of Colorado, that we can create at least 25,000 jobs in the state of Michigan.
Wow.
There is no other low-hanging fruit or regulation and combination of new tax money that is out there that is this easy. There just simply is nothing out there, because this is a simple regulation we can change, and it doesn't have an incurred cost for the government. We don't have to go hire a bunch of people. We don't have to do anything really. It just, the change of the rule all of a sudden creates this legal market and unleashes this pent up economic opportunity and spirit that is out there. So as much as possible, we want to encourage that and empower people in Michigan, particularly with the recession here. We were one of the hardest hit states, and we want to give people the power and the dollars in their pockets rather than having it run through a top down system model that keeps the wealth in the hands of the few. I mean, we're fighting this battle. It's cliche to say this, but on behalf of the 99% of Michiganders, this is about everybody having an opportunity, not a small elite class taken at this time, at this juncture, hijacking the cannabis reform movement for their own economic benefit. These other groups are Johnny-come-latelys to the party. The people on our team have been fighting this battle for years. Everybody from John Sinclair to Chuck Ream is, involved in our initiative. This goes back 50 years.
Wow, yeah.
And we've also had everybody on our team that have won every single local decriminalization election in the state of Michigan, including we just added Michael Tuffelmeyer in Grand Rapids to our board, Decriminalize GR. So across the board, we've run all those campaigns, and we know now is the time, and we are morally opposed to these other groups coming in and trying to hijack the cannabis reform movement, to enrich their cronies. So that's the other distinction. These others are kind of cronyism, cannabis control board models, and we're for the people, power to the people, jobs for the people, local control.
It is ripe
democracy.
for a corporate crony, takeover if we're not careful.
If you were government, you'd love this because you get to create an industry from scratch, and you get to sandbox the whole thing, and you get to create the rules that govern them, and you get to create how the revenue is generated and who gets to do it. So if you're one of those guys that thinks you're playing a life-size version of the Sims computer game, playing with all the rest of our lives, then this must look wonderful to you. But to those of us that actually live in that computer game, it's kind of frightening to think that there would be some giant avatar who we don't get to control and who doesn't care what we think or want, making all the decisions on these. And that's really what Jeff is referring to.
Yeah, we're not trying to get rid of the Mexican drug cartels in exchange for corporate cartels.
Right.
That's not the strategy here.
This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan.
I'd like to, just for our listeners, clarify the similarities between, say, Colorado's law and our proposed law that you represent. What are they, and what are the differences?
Good, I'd like to know that.
Well, when you look at Colorado's law, Colorado does a couple things that we do too. They respect the medical, so medical still is allowed to coexist. In the state of Washington, they've tried to eliminate the medical because they have the recreational or the adult use. So in that respect, we're copying some of the successful versions in Colorado. Colorado allows individual cultivation. Colorado allows individuals to register with the state and to be able to conduct transactions with distribution centers. So for those things, those are some of the successful areas that we copied. And we also learned from some of their mistakes too, in regards to packaging and labeling, specifically on some of the products that are out there. We want to not recreate some of the mistakes that they made and make sure that medibles and other things don't end up in the wrong hands.
We don't want New York Times columnists freaking out when they...
We also don't need a whole lot of fake news stories going out there scaring everybody, and that's certainly what happened in Colorado too.
Well, and a couple other things we've learned from Colorado. A lot of people say Colorado tax rates are too high, and in fact they tax medical as well. We specifically keep medical tax exempt here in the state of Michigan, which is something we did to protect patients. But we also learned that don't set the tax rate too high because the theory is that keeps people in the black market.
Right.
So we think we can create more jobs, more revenue than Colorado, and we've learned from those things. Like Rick said, we have child-resistant packaging, and we have labeling on edibles and things like that. We have enhanced penalties if something happens on school property. We've modeled distribution to a minor. It's the same punishment for anyone who does that as distributing alcohol to a minor. And of course, we make the argument that marijuana is actually safer than alcohol, so that's a pretty appropriate punishment, we believe. But we've learned from these things. We have the advantage of seeing what's worked and what doesn't, improving the making the Michigan model as this version 2.0 of legalization. So it's even better than what's happening in these other states.
We saw the corporate model apparently take over in Canada, and one of the things we had the Prairie Plant Bill here, where some of the GOP members were promoting this. We had the former Speaker of the House in as a lobbyist on that bill, and that would be to basically carve up the state and have 10 different facilities that would produce all of the marijuana. One of the things that I found when I did a little digging on how that was working in Canada were a lot of complaints that it was ineffective as medicine, it wasn't good as recreation, it wasn't good as anything, and that it was just basically, the name was there, but it was not well done. Are we done with that proposal, or is that proposal still hanging out there?
Boy, I sure hope we're done with that. Now, that was actually passed into law and signed by the governor, but there's a caveat, and that is the law won't kick into effect until federally marijuana is rescheduled to a Schedule 2 or less, Schedule 2, 3, or 4. That's not likely to happen anytime soon. So that's still out there, and what that bill proposed was that marijuana would be grown in commercial centers and distributed through big box pharmaceutical companies like Walmart and Rite Aid and some of the others, which we never really found out how excited they were about the thought of having to give out joints and little one-hitters. The important thing to remember is the Canadian system was a total abject failure, and they've had to redo their system several times. The Canadians don't use what we traditionally consider a dispensary, they mail marijuana directly to the patients from the home office and wherever they're located at, which is bizarre. Here we worry about a mail truck carrying cannabis and it going to get robbed by thugs as it passes through a bad section of neighborhood. But in Canada, it's commonplace. It's standard, and it's not remarkable at all. So you can really see the dichotomy that exists between the way that people perceive marijuana and its threats or its benefits.
Well, here's what I wondered about. What would a law like that, which is hanging out there, and there is a possibility that as he leaves office, Obama might decide to make a last-minute executive order and reschedule the drug. I don't know if his executive powers will extend that far, but then that law would kick in. What happens to your bill, your ballot proposal? I mean, again, they're vulnerable to that kind of change coming in and totally upending the system?
Well, our proposal would supersede Senate Bill 660 because it's an initiatory law. Now, there could be conflicts of law, and you see those things play out, maybe in courtroom dramas afterwards. But our law should trump any other law that's out there. Now, it can be enacted and then it can be amended by the legislature with a 3/4 majority. But I want to touch back on the Canadian thing for a minute here, because people need to realize that this battle in Michigan is emblematic of the bigger picture, where if people are following what's happening in Ohio, Responsible Ohio is in a lot of heat. The Ohio legislature is actually enacting legislation possibly to prevent monopolies from going the constitutional amendment route. We saw players like Dan Gilbert do casino monopolies in Ohio, and we've heard rumors that casino people may be behind the Michigan marijuana takeover. There's a lot of political intrigue behind the scenes, and there are people watching us now in Michigan because we have the most progressive, cutting-edge marijuana reform initiative in the entire country. And we can say that hands down. You can compare us to anyone. We have the best. And so if we win here, it sets the trend. Whereas if they win in Ohio and the monopolists win, it sets the trend that way. And everyone says you always look to California, these places. Well, what happens in Michigan is going to affect what happens in Illinois next. Chicago is a huge market, is the third biggest city in America. We're going to have a huge effect on the entire Midwest, New York, and these states that are sure to come down the road. So it's very important that we win with MILegalize, because if we don't, the trend's going to be towards the Canadian corporate model, big money, dark money Michigan model that a lot of people just find objectionable.
You have two hurdles. You have to get over the hurdle of the number of signatures to get it approved then and put on the ballot. Then you have a massive educational program to do in order to promote and distinguish. So often what we see is that if there's two proposals on the ballot related to the same topic, they both go down because people get confused. So what is phase 2 for you in terms of the outreach and promotion and marketing of the...
Well, I'd just like to say that we just had a poll release that showed 56% of Michiganders were in favor of legalization, and it was I think it was a Pew Research poll. So we don't have to educate people on legalization being the right choice any longer, which is a wonderful thing to not have to be burdened with, although we still have some education to do with certain age groups and things.
So what if they pass both?
Well, then the one that receives the most yes votes is the one that's put on.
Oh, really? So then it...
I mean, that is what we've been told, isn't that correct?
Is that right?
That's correct.
And the other one is just simply kicked to the curb?
That's right. So there could be three. And whatever one gets the most votes is going to be law.
Wow.
In that case, we certainly feel like we have the advantage. With our board of directors being so diverse and having represented so many different geographic areas of the state, plus having been involved in the news for so many years on the subject, I think we have the edge as far as the social goes.
Plunk. We'll see. That's going to be fascinating. What do you think is in that third proposal that we don't have any specifics on? What is that all about?
Well, we know they're going to eliminate the caregiver model. We know that they're going to create, this is what we've been told, that this is evolving most likely, but this is straight from the horse's mouth. We know that they're going to create, they're modeled off of Responsible Ohio. There's going to be a small group of investors that control all the distribution, and there'd be no more growers. You'd have to go work at the factory farm and be an employee and have your payroll and your pension, and that's what they envision. And there would probably be dispensaries, but those would be independent, but you'd have to get your product from one of the big factory farms.
Spray it with a little paraquat like
they'd probably who knows do what, but eliminate the individual grower,
that's the big issue, isn't it?
RFIDs.
I mean, that's the one way to really distinguish. It's whether you maintain the individual grower or not, because that is a level of freedom and a level of choice that isn't simply available in either the big government or the big or the big money models.
You know, you mentioned something just a second ago worth revisiting. Senate Bill 660 mandated that all marijuana distributed would be irradiated with radiation, simply to eliminate any mold or spores because it had been housed for so long. And an MCC or an MRC type program, that could be mandated in there as well. I don't think anybody should have to eat things or take things into their body that have been intentionally subject to radiation.
We should note
It's
that
atrocious.
the fear about, so the MRC model, which is this heavy top-down oligopoly model, there'd be nothing if the MCC model is passed to prevent this Cannabis Control Board from basically being hijacked by the oligopolists and having that system instituted. So
Right.
if people want to make sure they prevent the oligopoly and they put the what we call the people's law into place, you got to support MILegalize. That's the stark contrast.
I think you have a head start because I do think that the people who have been passionate about this issue have done a good job of telling the story in Michigan. And we see people like Jim Power with his son going to the Capitol and telling about the stories of medical marijuana. We see success stories coming out of Colorado that it didn't turn out to be the gloom and doom end of the world that people had been announcing it would be. So we do have those kinds of stories, but I do think it's going to be quite a challenge. I mean, you're up against some formidable competitors, I would say, for the public attention here. What do you think they'll go after you on?
You know, Jim Powers is on our board of directors too.
Oh,
by
is
the way.
he?
You mentioned that, so
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. What are they going to go after you on? How are they going to say that yours is not the one to pass? How are they going to demonize you?
They started doing that actually as collecting petitions. They've supposedly had a flyer they've been handing out to the people collecting the petitions. One of the things they complain about is that we only have a 10% tax. So they're looking for a higher tax, and that's one of the things they're trying to attack us on.
Get
We don't
rich.
make the common man suffer hard enough is basically.
Yeah, it's just what we need.
The Republicans are saying our tax isn't high enough, so
That's quite interesting. Gee, that's sometimes ideology gets trumped, doesn't it? Well, I would love to think we've had Rick Thompson here from Compassion Chronicles, and we've also had Jeff Hank and also Joshua Covert, two attorneys from the local area who are involved with the MILegalize petition that will be passing its first hurdle here, we hope, in December, and then see it on the ballot in 2016, and then that'll be when Donald Trump's on the ballot, so you'll be able to help defeat him. That'll be kind of interesting. So make sure to tune in next week to Lansing Online News Radio. This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan, and thank you for listening.